And now, for our final presentation tonight, we have a 20-minute segment that's a continuation of a piece that's been put together by Siobhan Ciresi of HumanityTranscending.com. So please do stand by as I spin up this segment of her presentation.
That would transform the American economy, he set out to replace a world of independent oilmen with one giant company controlled by him. That's a quote from the Rockefeller's History Channel. In 1870, Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company of Ohio was born, now ExxonMobil. And just a year later, the Rockefellers began crusading to dominate the whole industry. It became apparent that the entire nature of the enterprise was about putting independent, individual entrepreneurs out of business by strategically cornering them and sabotaging their businesses and livelihoods. Quote, "It was a conspiracy, really. It was one of the first great economic conspiracies in this country," end quote. Peter Collier, biographer, the Rockefeller's History Channel documentary. Rockefeller business practices, if we can call it that, they're more like mafioso crime family business practice, would infuriate and bewilder independents in the oil industry. Many of them refused to sell crude oil to Rockefeller and his associates. But this didn't stifle the growing monopoly in the least. Standard Oil exterminated their competition by using tactics such as purchasing all oil barrels on the market, so competitors would have nothing to store or ship oil in. They would buy up all of the available chemicals that were necessary to refine oil, and with the help of their railroad partners, the Rothschilds, they'd literally create a large-scale shortage of the railroad tank cars needed to transport oil. In actuality, assuming total control over the scarcity or abundance of the nation's critical energy supply. The Rockefeller plot was summed up by his brother and business partner, William Rockefeller, when he described the plan as war or peace. Sell out to Standard Oil, or suffer the consequences and watch your business and your livelihood brutally die. The ruthless nature of John D. Rockefeller became more evident when people discovered that, quote, many of Rockefeller's targets had no idea that the local refiners who were slashing prices and acting like competitors were actually agents for Standard Oil, end quote. The deception and secrecy goes deeper. Rockefeller would mandate a secret code for insiders only. He instructed his agents to communicate to each other in this code, ensuring the privacy of their iniquitous criminal operations. In just 2 months, he had taken over 22 of the 26 Cleveland refineries, quote, revealing the single-minded drive that would make him both the wonder and the terror of American business. End quote, the Rockefeller's History Channel. Methodically, John D. Rockefeller was doing more than transforming and taking over the oil industry. Standard Oil's effect would change the way America did business from then on, while at the same time fuel an industrial revolution. John D. proudly declared, quote, the day of combination is here to stay. Individualism has gone, never to return, end quote. By 1879, at age 40, Rockefeller controlled 90% of the oil refining in the world. Within a few years, he would control 90% of the marketing of oil and a third of all the oil wells. This very young man controlled what is not only a national but an international monopoly in a commodity that is about to become the most important strategic commodity in the world economy. In 1911, Standard Oil was broken up by the United States Supreme Court under antitrust laws, the body of laws prohibiting monopoly and unfair business practices. But in corrupt fashion, it was nothing more than a smokescreen, as Standard Oil was merely divided into 7 corporations, all still controlled by the Rockefellers. The money masters, how international bankers gained control of America. The Rockefeller kingpins would amass a great fortune, and throughout the expansion of their financial empire, invest and reinvest that fortune into many sectors of American life, reshaping the country by creating highly influential organizations and institutions, and using their wealth for, quote, personal ends to pursue their professional and social objectives, end quote. Peter Collier, the Rockefellers. Many of these objectives through so-called philanthropic works. Inside observers over the decades and the passage of time itself would reveal the true nature, the motives and interests underlying the outpouring of family wealth. An interesting characteristic of families like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers is their anonymity within mainstream common knowledge. We don't hear or see much about the members of these families, nor are we taught or even made aware of their gigantic influence in society, politics, banking, economics, industry, and so forth. It is amazing how much of our own history we do not know. Their agents, their frontmen, are responsible for dealing with the public, while these bloodlines, along with others, rule and operate from behind the scenes. They have agents crawling all over Washington, D.C., lobbying the U.S. government in favor of their far-reaching globalist interests. Banking came easy. Early on, John D. Rockefeller invested in many multinational endeavors with the prestigious Kuhn Loeb and Company. One such venture was the prominent railroad companies. Hence his ability to implement large-scale railroad car shortages when competitors wouldn't give in to his demands. Kuhn Loeb and Company also joined in partnership with Rockefeller in 1911 to gain control of the Equitable Trust Company, which was later to merge and become the Chase Bank. Ron Chernow tightened the life of John D. Rockefeller Sr. By the 1930s, John D. Rockefeller Jr., along with the Rockefeller family, were the largest shareholders of Chase National Bank. In the 1940s, David Rockefeller joined the staff of Chase National Bank, whose chairman at the time was his uncle Winthrop Aldrich, the son of the powerful U.S. Senator Nelson W. Aldrich. Chase National Bank later became the Chase Manhattan Bank in 1955, and again later became what is known today as J.P. Morgan Chase. At the roots, the blending of the J.P. Morgan firm and the Chase firm is a business merger between the Rothschild and Rockefeller banking bloodlines. Quote, the year 1952 marks the end of the transition from John D. Rockefeller Jr. to his sons. It's from that point on that the brothers' generation begins to have the recognition, visibility, and effective control over things that allow them to do the kinds of things they want, end quote. Peter Johnson, biographer, The Rockefellers documentary. In our learning of Rockefeller interests over the century, one in particular is worth familiarizing ourselves with. The Population Council was established in 1952 by John D. Rockefeller III and is funded by the Rockefellers largely in part through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. As an international organization, the council would conduct biomedical, social science, and public health research. Curiously, the council has its origin in the eugenics movement, defined as selective breeding, the movement devoted to improving the offspring of humanity through the control of hereditary factors in mating. Or as knighted eugenicist Sir Francis Galton defined it as, the study of the agencies under social control that improve or impair the racial quality of future generations, either physically or mentally. Researcher and filmmaker Alex Jones simply defines modern-day eugenics as the scientific rationale for tyranny. The Rockefellers have an affinity for controlling and reducing populations. In an article written for the New York Times, David Rockefeller boasts about China's accomplishments under the control of communist dictator Mao Zedong. He writes, "The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded." A China Traveler by David Rockefeller, New York Times, August 10th, 1973. Rockefeller's view of success is jarringly disheartening, to say the least. Under Mao Zedong, it is estimated by historians that roughly 40 to 60 million members of our human family were heartlessly and brutally exterminated. Public executions, mass murders, deliberate starvation, and death by forced imprisonment in detention camps with some of the most deplorable, inhumane conditions known to man were just some of the methods used. Mao is one of the scariest dictators our modern world has ever seen, and David Rockefeller is praising this man's performance. As far back as 1902, the Rockefellers made moves to also control education in this country. John D. Rockefeller, in collaboration with his son John D. Rockefeller Jr., founded the General Education Board. Chartered by Congress, the board was especially active in promoting the public school movement in the early part of the 20th century. William Torrey Harris, United States Commissioner of Education, from 1889 to 1906, stated that, quote, "Education must make the individual obedient to the requirements of the social institutions under which he lives." End quote. The History and Philosophy of Education, Harris. Most of us think we go to school to learn valuable information. But while the majority of us walk around oblivious to the realities of our world, the Rockefellers and their allies steadily hold this vision. Quote, "In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to turn these people or any of their children into philosophers, men of learning, or of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen of whom we now have ample supply. The task that we set before ourselves is a very simple and a very beautiful one. To train these people, as we find them, to a perfectly ideal life, just where they are. So we will organize our children into a little community and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shop, and on the farm." End quote. The Rockefeller General Education Board, Occasional Paper No. 1, 1906, authored by Rockefeller-appointed Frederick Gates. In 1960, the General Education Board would terminate its operations. However, its programs would be shuffled under the umbrella of the ever-present Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefellers financially support up to 75 Ivy League schools such as Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, and overseas institutions like the London School of Economics, the University College of London, and more. We are fully aware that they have been and still are profoundly involved in international politics and global monetary matters. They have funded, established, and been involved with major international institutions including the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the Brookings Institution, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and as we know, the Population Council, the Bilderberg, the CFR, and the Trilateral Commission, among many others. Rockefeller family interests and influence would continue to grow branches throughout the country, controlling sectors of the Federal Reserve's network of banks and holding public office. In 1965, David Rockefeller, with other elites, formed the Council of Americas, to promote and assist in the economic integration of the Americas. Some noteworthy corporate members of the council include Walmart, Time Warner, Ford, GE, Microsoft, McDonald's, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola, AIG, General Motors, and Kissinger, McLarty and Associates, Encyclopedia Britannica. In 1978, the Rockefellers would initiate the founding of the G30, Group of 30, another powerful and private organization funded by major central, commercial, and investment banks, comprised of leading international financiers and academics. The G30's first chairman was Johannes Witteveen, former managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Today's chairman of the G30 is our very own Paul Volcker in the White House. Incredibly, it can actually be said that Volcker and many others is a product of the Rothschild-Rockefeller banking families. But this is where his roots are. He learned the art and secrets of banking under the guidance, principles, and agendas put forth by these private banking monopolies. And right now, as stated before, he serves as chairman of the Economic Recovery Advisory Board under current President Barack Obama. It begins to make sense, this reality that the international bankers are in control of the American government. Almost every office in Obama's administration is held by Bilderberg members, CFR members, and Trilateral Commission members, some of whom have been serving in presidential administrations for decades. For instance, protégés like Henry Kissinger and Alan Greenspan are veteran staple consultants to the White House, no matter what president is in power. These permanent White House fixtures are schooled in Rockefeller banking. They are well-compensated players in this worldwide game of monopoly. The White House has long been saturated with members of the New World Order agenda. Wall Street took over the American government nearly a century ago. This has been achieved gradually, in part, by placing their agents in high-powered political positions, using them to move their self-serving policies through and turning them into law. Mingling and meeting with prominent world leaders ranging from Fidel Castro to Saddam Hussein was normal and is a normal order of business for the Rockefellers. They arrange and host visits to their elaborate estates to meet, greet, and entertain presidents, kings, queens, and the like. They uphold associations with the global monarchs and share personal relationships with other international banking families. More personal friendships include media moguls like the late Katharine Graham of the Washington Post, Richard Parsons, CEO of Time Warner, and old-time industry giants like Henry Ford. Throughout the century and prior, political leaders at the federal, state, and local level, economists, academic researchers, and more have commented on and forewarned of this takeover. The strategic and subtle capture of the United States by international bankers based in America, but having roots in the Rothschild banking houses of London, and even deeper roots that we discover later in Chapter 3. Banking in and of itself is not unlawful, but what is unfair and perverse is the practice of lending more money than there are reserves, and on top of it charging interest on the loan money that doesn't actually exist to begin with. It only exists theoretically. It's known as fractional reserve banking, and this is how our banking system operates in the United States. Quote, under this system, every bank in the United States can loan out about 9 to 10 times more money than they actually have, end quote, the money masters. Accruing interest on hypothetical money that is not tangibly in existence, but merely exists as a book or computer entry, could potentially be realized as the scam of the age once we wrap our minds around the concept of fractional reserve banking, especially when we take into consideration that this country has utilized interest-free currencies in the past. These are a series of quotes. John Kenneth Galbraith, Money, Whence It Came, Where It Went. Quote, "It seems difficult to grasp because to us average individuals, finance and economics seems highly complex and beyond our comprehension. But actually, the study of money above all other fields in economics is one in which complexity is used to disguise truth or to evade it, not to reveal it. The process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled."
And you've been listening to Siobhan Ciresi with a pre-recorded session, the fourth in a multi-part presentation. You can find out more about her presentations at humanitytranscending.com.
This is United We Strike Radio on the International Community Radio Network. Don't buy, don't comply, ask why. UnitedWeStrike.com Radio.
And that concludes the United We Strike Marathon for June 8th, 2013. I'm Gary Hendershot, pushing all the right buttons, hopefully, from my secret underground bunker just 12 miles south of the New World Order. And I want to thank the audience for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentations. Hope they got you thinking about things.